I'm very glad I didn't get invited for Thanksgiving dinner this year at the Dick Cheney household. In fact, I'd rather have taken my chances as a pilgrim trying to survive the first winter of 1620 than sit through the cold and piercing glares around the Cheney table. The Cheneys, much like America itself, reveal deep and painful scars inflicted by a failure to embrace commonly held beliefs and values. But then again, was there ever such a time when a harmony of beliefs pervaded this country? And the deep divide which everyone talks about now was once only a tiny hiccup between contrary views. Our nasty disagreements about almost everything, from guns to fracking to marriage equality to immigration to health care, point to the opposing values we consider indispensable to what living a good life really means. I'd like to think that Thanksgiving could unify us and bring us nicely together around the same table as we consider it a blessing to break bread with one another. But these days, we can't even agree on whom to bless and why. Expanded Medicaid in Utah would be considered as a blessing for many of us, while the legislative panel sees it as a curse. The humble act of expressing gratitude is likewise obfuscated, as some folks around the Thanksgiving table offer prayers of gratitude for legalized marijuana, legalized same-sex marriage, legalized abortion, and hopes to legalize citizenship for undocumented workers, while other guests express gratitude for all efforts taking America back to the days when biblical inerrancy ruled society, oil drilling was virtuous, and discrimination a cultural norm. A conflicted Thanksgiving, to be sure. Labels are not helpful, although there's always the inclination. Putting people into conservative or red boxes or conservative and blue boxes fails to get at the nub of our disparate sense of what it entails to lead good and moral lives. I believe that our divide has true historic roots, going back to when the Puritans dominated the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which featured, among other injustices, the Salem witch trials, a cautionary tale about extremism. The rhetoric we hear today still suggests that Satan is alive and well, living in big government. Puritan morals have lingered to this day. It's kind of a hangover from many centuries past, where a harsh theology based on rewards and punishment relieves us of any responsibility that we may have towards one another. The French political thinker Alexis de Tocqueville wrote after visiting the United States in the 1830s, "I think I can see the whole destiny of America contained in the first Puritan who landed on these shores." We're several centuries beyond de Tocqueville, but his observation remains credible today. Present-day Americans still exhibit, in their attitudes and behavior, traces of those austere English Protestants who started arriving in New England in the early 17th century. Puritans are not to be confused with pilgrims. They represent different waves of immigration into this country. I like the Pilgrims. They were an interesting lot. They first and foremost were considered separatists, not politically, but religiously. They believed that the Anglican Church of England had not gone far enough after breaking with Catholicism in 1535. Pilgrims felt that although the Pope was eliminated, a good thing, the Anglicans just substituted the king as head of the church. They sought a religious belief that held to the doctrine that all religious authority was grounded in Scripture. Since neither pope nor king could supersede biblical authority, they were thus inspired to break away from the Anglican Church, citing a passage from 2 Corinthians, "Come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord." The Pilgrims' intent was to preserve a basic simplicity and purity that were undermined by various efforts to organize faith around who was actually in charge. The Pilgrims regarded themselves as nonconformists, refusing to accept any authority beyond the revealed word. As separatists, the Pilgrims left England for Holland in 1608 in order to establish themselves as the rightful interpreters of the Bible. As much as we may differ from their highly literal understanding of the Bible, we have to give them credit that they interpreted the revealed word as pointing to an egalitarian society. The Pilgrims were not well received in Holland. In fact, it was so awful that they decided to set sail for a new land in 1620, hoping for an easier life there. They are not known as being insightful in their decision-making. In contrast to the Pilgrims, the Puritans had no desire to break away from the Anglican Church. I mean, they wanted to tweak the Anglican Church, but reform it from within. Where Pilgrims like to think of society where citizens have equal status, the Puritans believed that common citizens were not equipped enough intellectually to understand the complexities of religion, especially concepts like salvation. So Puritans, by virtue of their emphasis on scholarship and education, erected a more hierarchical society which broke down into a kind of class system according to levels of education. The Puritans arrived in the late 1620s, and by 1636 founded Harvard College as a sure means to continue knowledge in Scripture and divinity. So Harvard's elitism today is at least built solidly upon tradition, as they wrestle with what egalitarianism really means, even today. I always found a fascinating connection between predestination, a belief that only an elect few will be saved, and forming a hierarchy that dismantles all notions of equality among people. If only a few will be saved, then by golly, there must be some special people on earth. And God delivers unto them some special favors. Society looks entirely different if you believe that we are all God's children or God has some favorite pets. And if that's the case, how do I get to be one of his pets? If our worldview holds that we are our brother's keeper, then our moral judgments will differ considerably from those who want to climb up into the elite class whom God showers with great rewards. Those who profess the existence of different levels of God's grace, well, it's easy for them to justify racism and homophobia. Hard work, in order to achieve affluence also serves as a sign of God's favor. And this ethic hangs on even today with the belief, as so many ministers preach the gospel of wealth, the belief that opulence reflects a divine blessing that rewards one's labor. This view imposes a hierarchical system where people at the top arrive there through sheer grit, thus owing very little to those on the bottom rung. Work, maintained the Puritans, was a calling from God. Success was a path to salvation. This cannot help but drive a fundamental wedge between people, a moral imperative to make society more equal on the one hand, and a moral drive to keep others down so you can rise up and enter into the company of those whom God rewards on the other hand, shows that there's just a tremendous, tremendous division. In a series of recent experiments with college students, the Puritan work habits of yesteryear emerged as quite evident. American students were compared to Canadian students in a bunch of tests in which Americans still underscored the beliefs that hard work and good deeds would bring about rewards in this life and afterlife. In research into the prudishness of the Puritans, Americans judged promiscuous women more harshly than British students. And when compared to Asian students on rating a school principal who had canceled a prom because of sexually charged dancing, and support of a school that banned revealing clothing, Americans reflected a Puritan position which made researchers conclude that the puritanical intermingling of work, sex, and morality is alive and well in the American mind today. And this all led to the unsurprising conclusion that Americans who scored high on Puritan characteristics like self-reliance, self-discipline, hard work, they showed marked prejudice against racial minorities and the poor, and hostility towards social welfare efforts. So the hierarchical view of society introduced by the Puritans still affect people's perceptions of what poverty is, what poverty means, how poverty is caused. Believing that hard work needs to be rewarded, while laziness, those who are on welfare, implies that nobody has the right to infringe on the success of the well-doers. We're either hard-working or lazy, a dualism that hangs over us today from Puritan times. The historian John Coffey rightly asserts that today's evangelical movement serves as the carrier for Puritan values. And so, a great many Americans feel disdain for the unemployed, who were even denied an extension of unemployed benefits during the recent Great Recession. And thus we feel disdain for the poor, where food stamps are denied among the poorest of the poor, and health care for poor children and women are canceled, even as lower taxes are imposed upon the extremely wealthy. Where this kind of moral judgment comes from is clear. Life's sweet blessings are either to be enjoyed by all or only by some, depending on your fundamental worldview about society as a matter of individual pursuit or a cooperative effort.